I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood when she mocked my grandfather's rusty pickup. She paraded it on a projector, calling it junkyard decor, until the police chief walked in with a flood photo and raised his hand in salute. Her smirk cracked before the whole neighborhood. Let me take you back. The evening sun laid a golden wash over the driveway as I rubbed a rag across the hood of my grandfather's Ford F-100. The rust showed orange against the cloth, but to me it was the same truck that carried fence posts and pies to the church picnic half a lifetime ago. The vinyl seat still smelled faintly of gasoline and coffee his smell. For a few minutes the cul-de-sac was quiet enough that I could almost believe peace was something you could keep by polishing metal. Then Karen's laugh split the air. Sharp, high, and deliberate like a siren no one asked for. She paced down the sidewalk with her phone lifted, snapping photos as if she were shooting for a glossy magazine on Suburban Decay. Vintage belongs in print, Elias, she called voice sweetened with vinegar. Not in our front yards. Property values don't polish up so easily. I pressed the rag into my palm. It runs, I answered, and it's parked in my driveway. She tilted her head, already composing her next line. We'll see what the covenants say. A few more clicks, and she walked on heels, cracking the concrete like punctuation marks. The sprinkler down the block ticked along, trying to cover the silence she left. Across the street, Lee leaned on his fence and gave me a sympathetic two-finger salute. I raised the rag back at him, a gesture that felt smaller than I wanted. Inside, Martha was setting green beans on the table. She read my face before I sat down. She stopped again, didn't she? I shrugged, trying for lightness. She discovered panorama mode. We ate in the rhythm of a long marriage clink of forks, TV low with the weather. Normal until the computer in the den chimed. A new message subject line in bold, compliance notice unauthorized vehicle. The logo of Westerly Meadows HOA, a tidy oak leaf, sat in the corner like it had been pressed there by someone with too much time. My stomach tightened as I clicked. Non-operational or unsightly vehicles shall not be visible from public right-of-way. Remove or store within 30 days. Below it, a photo Karen's photo angled to make the truck look like junk waiting for a scrapyard. At the bottom, tow scheduled if non-compliant. My hand trembled just enough that the mouse stuttered on the screen. I scrolled further. A line in italics. Do not reply to this email. Conversation reduced to a command. Martha's voice behind me was low. 30 days. Eli. What if they really tow it tomorrow? I didn't answer right away. The truck sat outside, still warm from the sun, metal ticking as it cooled. Through the window, I saw its reflection hold steady against the fading light intact, stubborn mine. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the old house sounded like a tow chain tightening around the Ford. I lay in bed with my jaw clenched, listening for the groan of a flatbed, until the dawn light finally dragged me outside. The truck was still there, dew shining along its fenders like a quiet protest. I ran a hand along the metal cold and pitted. My grandfather's initials were scratched faintly under the driver's handle. That scratch had survived half a century of Kansas weather, yet one neighbor's laugh and a bylaw could erase it. Karen came striding down the sidewalk, earbuds dangling like trophies. I stepped off the driveway, the air sharp with frost. Karen, this is harassment. She didn't stop walking, just raised her chin as though sniffing at something spoiled. Neighborhood values matter, Elias. Sentiment doesn't. She tapped her phone screen, glinting. HOA has standards. Then she was gone, her perfume trailing like punctuation. By midweek, another envelope hit our mailbox. Martha handed it to me without a word. Inside was a glossy notice, heavier paper this time, stamped red across the bottom, second violation. They'd printed a fresh photo of the truck angled to catch the peeling paint in harsh daylight. Underneath, tow, subject to board approval. 30 days, shortened to 14. I stared so long the ink seemed to bleed. Martha sighed, slid a mug toward me. Cold coffee by the time I touched it. Caleb came in from the garage, hands streaked with grease shirt collar smudged. They're serious, Dad. I know, I muttered. He disappeared into the back room and came out dragging a dented metal file box. Dust rose like smoke when he dropped it on the carpet. Grandpa never threw anything away. We sat cross-legged in the box between us, flipping through brittle folders. Receipts for oil changes in the 70s, faded Polaroids of county fairs warranty slips for tires long gone. My patience was thin anger buzzing under my skin. Then Caleb froze. He held up a yellowed registration slip, edges curled. Look. The print was faded, but legible. Kansas Department of Revenue Motor Vehicle Division, 1976. Under Remarks in small type, Historic Vehicle Eligibility. The words pulled me upright. My pulse stuttered. Historic. That wasn't just nostalgia, it was a category. Caleb grinned grease streak on his cheek. Might be your loophole. Dad. Before I could answer, the screen door creaked. Lee shuffled across the lawn with his cane eyes narrowed. He leaned on the porch rail listening to our silence. Then, with the calm of someone who'd watched neighborhoods fight themselves for decades, he said, "Ask Tom Greer. He once made the board eat their own rules." I stared at him, the slip soft in my hand. For the first time in months, anger eased into something else, a faint glimmer fragile as that old paper. I carried the brittle papers into the church basement where the hallway bulbs hummed and the air smelled like burnt coffee and old songbooks. Tom Greer kept an office down here, a door with frosted glass and his name hand-lettered in steady block print. When I knocked, he didn't say come in. He just raised his eyebrows the way men who've seen too much traffic do, and the door eased open. Tom was 70 trim in that retired captain way, the starch gone, but not the posture. The room was neat in columns, stack of hymnals, stack of donated coats, stack of county brochures. The desk, scarred with teenage initials, looked like it had been rescued from a school that forgot what wood was for. He smelled faintly of gun oil and cheap diner coffee. It wasn't threatening, it was history. "I need a map," I said, setting the file on his desk. "HOA thinks my grandfather's truck is an eyesore. They've given me 14 days. He laid out the papers as if he were dealing cards. Violation notices, a printed photo of the Ford at its worst angle, the old 1976 registration card. His fingers paused on that one. The fluorescent light made the cellophane sleeve shine like water. He said. "That word there." He tapped with a knuckle. "Historic Vehicle Eligibility." The two of us stayed quiet long enough to hear the youth choir upstairs forget the second verse and find it again. Tom slid the registration aside and pulled a slim booklet from his drawer. Not a law book, more like a laminated cheat sheet he'd built for himself. He flipped, then flipped back. He angled it so the light caught the small type. "Kansas has a path for this," he said. "Different plate, different expectations. This isn't about sentiment, it's category. Vehicles 25 years old or older may be registered as antique or historic." He set the booklet down like a unifying line of scripture. "You qualify in your sleep. I can't force the board to like it," I said. "You don't have to." His mouth hid a very small smile. "The law has loopholes stronger than loud voices. The trick is filing correctly, then documenting relentlessly." He pushed the violation notice closer. "Start a log. Date, time, sender, attachments. Print everything. Certified mail when you respond." He glanced at the glossy photo. "And take your own pictures. Not beauty shots, operational proof. Battery leads. Engine running. Maybe a short video with the dash lights. Mechanics like your boy know how to make those honest. Caleb can help." I felt my shoulders loosen. It surprised me. A pair of parishioners drifted by the doorway with a box marked coats. Tom raised a hand, then returned to the page. "You'll apply for historic plates," he said. "But don't think the plate is the magic. The registration is. The state says what qualifies. The HOA can set taste, not law." "Karen is very attached to taste," I said. He chuckled once, the sound of a man who'd heard every version of every neighbor spat. "Karen is attached to a microphone. Same thing some days." He pulled out a state form from a manila folder labeled DMV odds and ends. The form was simple, the way state forms sometimes are before a clerk complicates them: owner info, VIN, year, purpose. There was a box for historic/antique. He put a sticky note on the top edge and scribbled my name in neat print. "You'll need a VIN verification." He looked at me over his readers. "The plate isn't for errand running. The language says," he checked his note, "driven only on special occasions, displays, parades, and similar uses." I nodded. "It mostly sits. I take it around the block to keep it honest." "You're a quiet man," he said, signing where he could as witness. "That helps?" I could feel the old auditor in me waking up. "What about their second letter shortening the timeline? They printed, tow, subject to board approval." "That's bluster," he said. "They'll try to make the tow company do the dirty work, but a tow from a private driveway under a misapplied bylaw is a nasty mess. Your job is to be unflappable and unassailable. Paper beats volume. My breath came easier than it had in months. The hum of the fluorescent tubes stopped being a nag and started being a metronome. "So, I file, I log, I certify, and you bring me a copy for the church file," he said. Because when they get loud, you'll want a witness who can say what you did and when. He slid a heavy rubber stamp across the desk like a baton in a relay. We also date stamp what you hand me. He filled in a second-form clerical copy, he called it, with the confidence of someone who had double-checked other people's math for decades. Then he did a funny tender thing. He wiped a finger along the desk, found a clear patch of wood between carved initials, and pressed the stamp, their test run. The impression came up clean. He nodded, satisfied, and stamped the historic application cover sheet. Received, St. Luke's Office, APAR 12 2019, bled into the cardstock in crisp purple mini Cliff. They'll still try to embarrass you, he said, setting the stamped sheet aside to dry. Expect a meeting where your truck goes up on a projector like a crime scene. I've been up on a projector before, I said. At city audit briefings. It's never flattering. Tom looked pleased. Good, so you know how to stand still and tell the truth while people decide whether to believe it. He walked me through a short script. Don't argue. Adjectives cite the registration site. Use, cite, that enforcement must be reasonable. No more than 2 sentences that sound like a lawyer, he said, holding up 2 fingers. People stop listening at 3. I folded the stamped application into a large envelope. What about the tow threat? We'll cross that when the plate's in hand, he said. In the meantime, a photograph of the truck inoperable won't help you. Keep it clean. Keep a cover on it if you can. Document. Document. He tapped the old registration one last time like a blessing. Also, thank your neighbor Lee. He's the kind of quiet witness who makes a difference in rooms where everyone thinks they're the judge. The choir upstairs hit a high note and stuck the landing this time. Somewhere in the kitchen, a coffee pot hissed its last inch onto a warming plate. Tom leaned back satisfied with the small mechanics of order reclaiming a corner of the world. Tom, I said, and my voice surprised me by how steady it sounded. I appreciate this. He gave me that calm captain's smile. Let them choke on their own bylaws, Elias. I left the basement with the envelope under my arm, the stamp still damp on the cover. Outside, spring wind moved through the churchyard maples, making a sound like paper being turned. I thought, good. Let's turn it. The red tag was the first thing I saw, flapping on the pickup's cracked windshield like a scarlet letter someone had stapled to my name. The paper snapped in the heat tape edges, curling each flick a little insult. I pinched a corner to stop the flapping and read the blocky print, Tau Notice, subject to board approval. Second 4.3. Beneath it, a stamped date. Someone had written Junkyard Decor on the margin in pen as if the official lines weren't vicious enough. The community center's parking lot boiled in summer shimmer. A row of folding chairs waited under a puddle of shade by the entrance. Inside it was colder air conditioning and fluorescent light. The projector hummed. A small crowd drifted toward cookies and the satisfaction of the righteous. Martha walked a step ahead of me, chin tucked. Caleb held the door, his hand tight on the handle, the tendon in his wrist like a wire. Karen owned the room the way people do when they've already rehearsed applause. The board sat in a dutiful row behind her, a treasurer who loved neat columns, a secretary whose pen clicked like a metronome, 2 members who looked anywhere but at me. Karen tapped the mic and smiled a TV host's smile. Thank you for coming, neighbors. Tonight's focus is community standards, how we protect our property values so everyone wins. Slide 1 was the oak leaf logo. Slide 2, the truck. The picture was crisp, high noon. Every patch magnified. The projector washed the color into something meaner than real life, the rust bright as a wound. This, Karen said, gesture slicing, is junkyard decor, unfortunately visible from the public right-of-way. A ripple of whisper. A woman near the aisle tilted her head the way people do at garage sales when they've already decided on a price. A man in a golf shirt coughed the sound that pretends to be a laugh. Martha's hand brushed mine, searching for something to hold. I kept my fingers steady on the chair back. My grandfather's photo was in my pocket edges, soft with time. I didn't pull it out. Not for this. The secretary clicked her pen and read from a sheet. Per Covenant, Second 4.3. Non-operational or unsightly vehicles shall not be visible from street or sidewalk. Karen nodded at the words as if she'd written them herself. We all know taste, she added, but we also know when taste slides into blight. The word landed like a small, gleeful brick. Someone passed me a stack of newsletters from the entry table. The front page held a flyer mocked up with mall-level graphic zeal, a cartoon of a distressed neighborhood with a sagging mailbox and my truck silhouette exaggerated, parked like a warning label. Across the top, protect our property values. At the bottom, in smaller print, if you see something, say something, violations at Westerly Meadows. Org. My name wasn't on it. It didn't have to be. Mini Cliff. In the room, a neighbor I didn't recognize lifted her phone, took a photo of the slide, and texted it, thumbs flicking. That's how rumors travel on rails faster than sense. Karen moved to slide 3, which was the same as slide 2 but closer. We asked the homeowner to comply. She said mild on the syllables, harsh in the eyes. We issued a second notice. 14 days. We are responsible stewards. Historic eligibility, Caleb muttered too low for anyone but me. He was right, but the certificate wasn't in my hand yet, and this crowd wasn't here for the kind of nuance the DMV prints on cardstock. I kept my voice and my paper for when they'd mean more. Karen turned to the board. We'll entertain comments. She meant applause. She got a few. One man said, my grandkids ask why that old truck is still there. Another slippery slope. Next, it'll be lawn ornaments. A laugh nibble rippled across the rows. Martha leaned toward me. We can leave, she whispered. I shook my head. We can listen. The words tasted like chalk. When it was my turn, I stood without the envelope. The pickup runs, I said evenly. It's been maintained. It's on my property. I'm pursuing a classification allowed by the state. 2 sentences that sounded almost like a lawyer. Tom's rule. Karen's smile went glacial. Our covenants address unsightly as well as operational. She turned to the crowd. We can't let every personal memory become a neighborhood standard. On the screen, the truck loomed a cartoon villain called to the stand. The treasurer asked for a show of support for firm enforcement. Hands rose like wheat in a wind that knows where it's going. I watched counted, didn't argue adjectives. The projector hummed. The air smelled like cold coffee and carpet. After, in the bright white of the entryway, the board broke into small knots of congratulations. A neighbor I used to lend tools to brushed by without seeing me. Another, the beekeeper who sold jars by the quart, said, tough situation, and kept walking. Outside, the heat slapped my face. The red tow notice stirred on the windshield again, snapping like a flag. Martha's eyes found the ground. Caleb's jaw worked. I can fix the rough idle, he said, as if the tone of the engine could smooth the tone of a meeting. I peeled the notice off carefully. The tape came away with a wet squeal. The paper had 2 checkboxes, unsightly, non-operational. Both were ticked with the heavy hand. Beneath a line for tow date pending. There was a signature that looked like a shrug. Don't, Martha said softly when she saw my face. Not here. I folded the notice in thirds and slid it into the envelope I kept for everything from the HOA the way I'd been taught to keep receipts and dignity in the same drawer. Above us, a cicada drilled the air like a dull saw. The asphalt wavered. For a bright second, I saw the truck at the flood in that '73 photograph my grandfather in a cap. Young, sure, unembarrassed by utility. The kind of pride that didn't need slides. Karen came out last, flanked by the treasurer and the secretary. She didn't look at me until she was 10 feet away. Then, she let her eyes travel over the truck the way a judge stares at a defendant after the verdict's already been drafted. Next time, she said, voice sugar dry, the police chief will see this eyesore himself. Caleb took a sharp breath. Martha touched his arm. I tucked the folded notice deeper into the envelope and put my palm on the truck's hot fender just long enough to steady myself against something that still belonged to me. The tow truck's steel chain clinked against my grandfather's bumper like a judge's gavel. It was early enough that breath smoked in front of faces, and the cul-de-sac sounded hollow, as if the cold had emptied it out. The diesel idled with a tired cough. Somewhere a porch light clicked on. Another followed. Doors cracked. Coffee steamed in paper cups. I stood in my driveway with my hands open the way you do when you're trying to keep a morning from becoming a scene. The operator's stocky hood up, name patch half peeled, lowered the hook and glanced over my shoulder as if the authority lived behind me. Karen stood there, arms folded, bright scarf thrown like a banner. We have the paperwork, she said to the air so the neighbors could hear. Finally, some real enforcement. He handed me a clipboard with a letter on HOA letterhead. The oak leaf, I'd come to dislike a paragraph quoting Secumber 4.3, a line that read, tow, subject to board approval. The signature was a scribble that looked familiar in a generic way, official when no one squinted. This is my private driveway, I said soft. No court order, no city request. HOA authorization, he answered, tone, rehearsed eyes, not unkind. They called it in. I'm just the hook. Behind him, phones came up at chest level like birds ready to lift. Karen's voice brightened to the pitch of demonstration. Elias, this is for everyone's benefit. Property values don't maintain themselves. I took a breath, felt it burn, and pulled a document from the envelope I carried like a talisman. The cardstock was still stiff from yesterday's pickup at the county office historic vehicle registration certificate, and the raised seal pushed a circle into my palm. "This is recognized by the state," I said. "The application was filed in April. The plate is pending. The vehicle is operational, exempt from your category." The operator squinted. He blew on his hands and leaned in. The purple stamp from the church office still showed faintly through the paper behind the county's embossing, two different worlds agreeing on a date. He nodded, then shrugged with a decent man's helplessness. "Not in my system yet. If it's not in the system, it's not policy. I'm supposed to proceed." Karen laughed once. "Paperwork fantasies don't stop real enforcement." The chain scraped the concrete. The ratchet turned teeth clicking with patient appetite. Caleb stepped forward, then stopped when Martha's fingers closed on his sleeve. I felt the truck settle under the geometry of force, an old body being asked to bow. The front tires left the gravel a breath's width, the kind of inch you only measure with dread. "Hold it," I said, and didn't raise my voice. "Let's read your order together." I tapped the line subject to board approval. "Who approved this when show me the vote?" He hesitated. "Minnie, Cliff?" Everything in the cold seemed to pause. The operator's radio crackled with that tinny distance tow yards carry. He raised it toward his mouth, then lowered it. He looked to Karen. "Don't let him intimidate you," she called. "We have emails. We have minutes." "Then bring them," I said. I held up the certificate so the seal caught the weak light. "And bring the police. If this isn't a civil issue, it's something worse." The operator shifted his boots on the frost-slick driveway. "I'm not getting in a fight," he said. "I'm following a work order. From a private association," I said, "on a private driveway, based on a rule about unsightly. That's taste, not law." A cough of laughter from a neighbor's porch. "He's quoting poetry," someone muttered. Another voice. "Just move the darn thing into the garage." Phones lifted higher, screens glowed like tiny courtrooms. Karen stepped closer, scarf bright as a stoplight. "You've had months, Elias. You could have complied quietly. Instead, you've made this a spectacle. I've made this a file," I said, the auditor in me refusing to die. "Dates, notices, copies, stamps." She leaned toward the operator stage whisper, not bothering to be quiet. "Proceed." Then, louder for the row of cups and cameras. "We owe our neighbors a standard." The ratchet ticked again. The truck's nose knotted up another shade thinner than an inch. I could hear the chain complain, a metallic zipper closing on a story that wasn't done yet. Martha's breath fogged and drifted. Caleb's jaw worked like he was chewing through the day. "I'm documenting this," I said to the operator, holding my phone chest high to mirror the audience. "Your name, the order, the tag number." I read it quietly, the way you do to make sure words land where they're supposed to. "If this truck leaves this driveway today, it leaves with a record." He swallowed. "Sir, And if you unhook," I said, "you leave with a record too, one that says you did the cautious, lawful thing." He stood with his hand on the lever, morality and payroll wrestling in his posture. His radio hissed one word and a string of numbers. The tow yard's voice didn't care about cul-de-sacs. He looked at Karen again. Her smile said the show must go on. "Tomorrow," she announced, projecting for the neighborhood, "we're holding a special session. I'll show the whole community the proof that he's finished." She gestured at my certificate as if it were a stage prop. "Let's see how far fantasies get in front of the board." The operator's grip loosened and tightened. The ratchet didn't move. The truck hung in indecision wheels, barely clear, like an animal that doesn't quite trust the trap. I slid the certificate back into the envelope, breathed on my hands, and said a sentence that felt like a hinge. "Then I'll bring my proof too." The diesel coughed. A crow scolded from the oak tree beside Lee's fence. Across the street, blinds feathered shut, then opened again. The morning had stopped pretending it wasn't a spectacle. Karen lifted her chin as if she could see the finish line already painted on my driveway. "Tomorrow," she said again. Satisfied now that a date sounded like a verdict, "we'll make it official." I stood with the cold eating through my coat and the chain's echo still in my ears, and tried to remember how my grandfather held himself when floodwater reached his knees, spine straight, eyes level, both hands on the wheel. I carried the embossed certificate into the HOA hall like it weighed more than steel. The room buzzed under the old neon tubes. Folding chairs scraped the linoleum in a tin chorus as neighbors settled. The projector threw a square of light across a portable screen, its fan whirring like a hairdryer someone forgot to turn off. On the back table, a box of powdered donuts sat beside a coffee urn, breathing steam and disappointment. Karen tapped the microphone, smiled the smile you rent for occasions, and clicked to her slideshow. Slide 1, the oak leaf logo. Slide 2, my grandfather's pickup captured at high noon in the cruel honesty of summer. Zoomed. Cropped. The worst angles selected like a prosecutor's exhibits. This, she said the word sculpted, is junkyard pickup, visible from public right-of-way. Weeks of non-compliance. She nodded to the board like a conductor to an orchestra that already knew its part. Murmurs rolled across the rows. Someone coughed. Someone else took a picture of the picture because nothing is real until it's been photographed twice. I stood when the chair invited relevant comments. My envelope felt warm under my arm where my coat had been holding it as if paperwork could carry a pulse. "I have the state's response," I said, voice steady enough to surprise me. I withdrew the historic vehicle registration certificate cardstock thick, the county's seal raised like a thumbprint. Application filed in April verified. The vehicle is classified by the state. Its use is limited and appropriate. Minnie Cliff. Karen's laugh was small but precise, the kind that blinks a light on a bullseye. "Fraudulent," she said, pausing on the consonants. "Printed at home, likely. We'll verify." A few heads turned toward me with the quick appetite of gossip. I held up the seal so it caught the projector's stray light. "You can feel this," I said, letting the edge brush the fingertip of the treasurer as he leaned forward despite himself. The county clerk stamped it yesterday. The secretary pen, clicking like a metronome, shuffled her binder. Tonight's agenda, she read from a typed page with a blue header. Hearing minutes. Special session agenda, item 3. Vehicle compliance. Monroe E. She looked up surprised to hear her own formality in the air rather than only on paper. Karen pivoted unfazed. She clicked to slide 3. The truck again closer, the rust made dramatic by saturation. "Neighbors, we must protect our values. The covenants are clear." She read a clipped line. One of her favorites. "Non-operational or unsightly vehicles shall not be visible from street or sidewalk." She let the word unsightly dangle like a hook. "I'm not here to argue adjectives," I said, keeping Tom's rule no more than 2 sentences of lawyer scent. "I'm here to present classification." At the doors, the room shifted, people turning a ripple of attention. A uniformed silhouette stepped in, hat in hand. Chief Ronald Avery did not stride. He arrived. He looked older than the badge made him, the way men do when the town has learned their first name. He nodded to the board, nodded to the crowd, saw the slide, and then saw me. "Evening," he said to the room voice carrying without the mic. "Heard you might want a little context." Karen pasted on a welcome that did not reach her eyes. "Chief Avery," she said sweetly, "we're discussing a matter of community standards." He moved closer to the projector, reached into a manila envelope, and held up a black and white photo, the kind with deckled edges that curl with time. "Summer of '73, he said. "Flood took County Road 14. Supplies needed ferrying while we waited on the guard. This truck," he pointed, and even the light on the screen seemed to hold, still brought crates of drinking water from the high school lot to the south side. "That driver," he glanced at me. "Your grandfather, wasn't it?" I swallowed. "Yes, sir?" The room quieted on a hinge I could feel. Even the projector's hum sounded like it leaned in. He set the photo on the table where the coffee cups had been, and the white of the powdered sugar made the picture darker, sharper by contrast. A man, young cap low, stood by the F-100 with one hand on the bed rail. The river behind him looked like a muscle pulled too tight. Karen clicked to slide 4 out of habit, but no one looked. She reached for the mic. "With respect, Chief, our covenants are rules for living together," he said, not unkindly. "And they matter. So does history, so does lawful classification." He turned to me. "You've got your paperwork." I handed him the certificate. He traced the circle of the county seal with the thumb, the way people check if paint is dry. "This is in order," he said. He handed it back to me and then did something I was not prepared for. He faced the room, planted his boots on the bad carpet, and raised his right hand palm to brow, a clean, quiet salute, not to me exactly, but to the idea of the truck in the photo and the one in my driveway, and to the line that ran between them. The room didn't breathe for a moment. Then it gasped a soft intake as if everyone had suddenly remembered oxygen had rules too. Someone whispered, "Well, I'll be a pecan sweet," phrase I hadn't heard in years. The treasurer set his pen down without clicking. The secretary stopped mid-note. Even the projector fan seemed to admit it was only noise. Karen's color drained in slow motion. "This is theater," she said this time without the audience she expected. She reached for papers, restacked them, clicked a dead remote. A hand lifted in the third row. "The secretaries of all people." She leaned toward the mic voice, careful as if it were trying on courage. "Point of order," she said. "Motion to remove the president." The last word landed with the soft thud of a book finally closing. Karen slumped into her chair like someone who had just learned the difference between volume and authority. I stood with the certificate in one hand and the old photo on the table and tried to keep my face still, while something inside me, stubborn and long-suffering, began to loosen. The chair looked left, looked right, and cleared his throat. "We'll take the motion," he said. The pickup gleamed under Kansas sunlight, the kind that turns grain heads white at noon. I could see the flag from the pavilion ripple red-white-blue across the polished chrome of the side mirror, little stripes that slid when the breeze lifted off the lake. Smoke climbed from a line of barbecue grills, soft and blue, carrying pepper and brown sugar and all the reasons a neighborhood remembers why it's a neighborhood at all. Kids ran in thundering arcs through the grass shoes, lighting dust that never quite settled. Martha handed out paper plates with that practical grace she saves for holidays and arguments. Caleb manned the tongs, flipping brats with an attention I wished I'd had when I was his age. Someone had strung bunting along the rail. Someone else had set a galvanized tub full of ice and sodas, the kind you open with that hiss that sounds like a day off. The truck sat nose out near the curb like a guest of honor who doesn't like the spotlight. I'd waxed the hood that morning. The paint still held little islands of rust, but the color looked purposeful again, like a man with gray at his temples who knows he's kept the roof from leaking. People came over one by one, palm on the fender, asking the same questions old men ask at car shows. Year, straight 6 column. Shift, I answered, then listened while they told me where they were when the river reached the low bridge and who drove supply runs and which church opened its basement first. Chief Avery arrived in shirt-sleeves badge clipped to his belt as if the day didn't need more shine. He shook my hand, then set a black and white photo on the picnic table, our copy of the flood picture newly reprinted. "Figured it belonged with the potato salad," he said. The edges curled already in the heat. "Good place for it," I said, and meant it. Tom Greer drifted over with a coffee that had gone tepid. He studied the engine bay without lifting the hood the way some people rate a room by the jokes no one tells. "She holding idle?" he asked. "Dead steady," I said. We advanced, timing a whisper. Caleb found the sweet spot. Tom nodded the nod of a man whose counsel got obeyed. "Due process on 4 wheels," he said, and took a drink like the words needed washing down. On the pavilion steps, the new HOA board lined up in their summer-best short sleeves. No microphones, just a sheet of paper, and the courage to read it without looking like they were apologizing for breathing. The secretary, different woman now. No pen-clicking habit lifted the page with 2 careful hands. The crowd drifted closer. Grills hissed under light neglect. "Neighbors," she said, and the plural sounded like a prayer. "We have an addendum to announce." She glanced at me. Not performative, just human, then back to the words. Addendum 12B. Historic and antique vehicles as defined by state law are exempt from compliance tow when parked on the owner's property. She swallowed once, continued. Reasonable screening or cover is encouraged and verification shall be obtained from a state or county office prior to any enforcement action. The paper shook a little in the breeze. She smoothed it on her thigh. "We thank those who helped us get this right. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was better an admission of growth." A cheer didn't rip the air so much as warm it. Applause spread in a circle more hand-to-hand than ear-to-ear. Someone thumped me on the back. The beekeeper lifted a jar and said, "About time the rules remembered the town." Marjorie dabbed the corners of her eyes and muttered that she always cries when paperwork finds its conscience. Chief Avery caught my eye and raised 2 fingers from his temple. Not a full salute, he'd given that when it counted, but a nod that said the day belonged to burgers and kids and somebody's burned batch of brownies. Tom leaned in. "Good to see due process win," he murmured, the way you say grace with your hat still on. I slipped behind the wheel for the first time in months without doing it for evidence. The seat sighed. The steering wheel wore the smoothness of 100 turns and 1 flood and a long winter of arguments. I turned the key. The engine took the invitation cleanly. No theater, just a baritone that knew its register. The gauge needle settled where it always had when the world made sense. In the windshield, a parade of small reflections went by, flag's elbows cups, a child's bright shoes, then the lake's glint stitched across the glass, and the whole thing felt like a film spliced back together. Caleb knocked the hood with the kind of affection men allow themselves in public. "Runs like she means it," he said. "Always did, I said. We're the ones who needed tuning." Martha slid into the passenger side and set a napkin-wrapped bun on the dash like a sacrament. "Don't you dare eat that in here," she said, and smiled big enough to make me disobey on principle someday when no one's looking. Neighbors filtered past the open door, leaving small offerings the way people leave stones on a grave, a recipe card for slaw, a keychain from a feed store gone. Since 2009, a Polaroid someone found of the truck hauling hay. I tucked them in the glove box, an archive modest and complete. From across the park, I caught movement that wasn't celebration. Karen stood near the gazebo's shade arms, folded the way a person folds arms when they're remembering a story they no longer control. She didn't step forward. She didn't leave. Her face worked through a series of brief auditions, defiance, boredom, something that wanted to be grace and couldn't find its lines. The new board president nodded to her without theater. She nodded back, which is a start in any language. The secretary taped the addendum to the pavilion post, the oak leaf logo now sharing a page with words that understood their place. The paper looked fragile in the sun, but the staples held. A child ran under it chasing a soccer ball. The page fluttered and settled again, a flag of modest victory. I eased the truck forward a yard and back just to feel the clutch take and the tires agree. The engine didn't waver. In the chrome, the flag's reflection broke into pieces and rebuilt itself with each ripple of wind. The lake sent a breeze across the grills that flipped smoke the other direction toward the parking lot, where it couldn't hurt anyone with allergies and could teach the rest of us how a day gets to smell when it's doing its job. Chief Avery lifted his paper cup in a small toast. Tom tilted his coffee in reply. Lee, at the fence line, gave a salute that was more wrist than elbow. Martha touched my sleeve. Caleb leaned on the fender grease ghosts still in the seams of his hands. The picture of my grandfather in the flood lived in my head like a reel that never warps. Not a sermon, just proof that a thing can be asked to carry more than itself and still start when you turn the key. As the sun slid a little west, shadows made the picnic tables look taller. Kids shrieked at something invented. A dog slept under a bench with one eye open. I let the engine idle, then shut it off. The sudden quiet landed like a truth you can sit on. Facts don't shout. I thought the line arriving without effort. They endure. And if you tend them, paper stamps, seals, old steal the neighbor's memory, they carry you farther than volume ever could. The lake shimmered with barbecue smoke and laughter, and for once the only paper in sight was a recipe card taped to the pavilion post. Our old pickup sat polished by the curb, the hood reflecting flags, and children darting past no longer a target, but a guest of honor. Justice isn't loud. It's steady, stitched together by neighbors who chose to show up rather than look away. We didn't defeat a board, we mended a street and left a space for one another again. Have you ever seen a neighborhood heal itself after rules went too far? I'd love to hear your story.